Good morning. I found another section in Rise of the Warrior Cop that I wanted to share with y'all. This is page 206, and I think we'll probably go to page 211, maybe, something like that. In 1989, a friend asked Peter Kraska if he wanted to tag along for a U.S. Coast Guard exercise on Lake Erie. Kraska is a criminologist at the University of Eastern Kentucky. His students describe him as demanding, whip-smart, and in the words of one female student, a strangely hot lumberjack. He agreed to go along, mostly out of curiosity. While on that trip, Kraska learned that the Coast Guard works closely with the U.S. Navy on drug interdiction efforts. The Navy itself would intercept boats or ships that fit drug courier profiles, but would then have Coast Guard personnel on board to conduct the actual searches, seizures, and arrests. One Coast Guard officer flatly admitted to Kraska that the procedure was a way of getting around the Navy's policy prohibiting its personnel from participating in civil police actions. Kraska was both alarmed and intrigued. The experience started him down a road of scholarship focused on examining the ways in which the U.S. military was increasingly being drawn into enforcing drug laws. In particular, Kraska began looking into indirect militarization, the rise of SWAT teams, and other paramilitary police teams, what might be called the criminal justice industrial complex, and the increasing tendency of public officials to address social problems with martial rhetoric and imagery, and to suggest military-like solutions, Clinton, from the wars on crime and drugs to the heavy weaponry and vehicles that police were beginning to use, to the proposals that juvenile offenders be punished in boot camps. Kraska obtained funding to conduct 2 broad surveys of police departments on their use of SWAT teams. His resulting reports systematically document a previously unheeded 2-decade insurgence of militarism into just about every city and county in America. The numbers were staggering. By 1995, 89% of American cities with 50,000 or more people had at least one SWAT team, double the percentage from 1980. Among smaller cities, populations between 25,000 and 50,000, 65% had a SWAT team by 1995, a 157% increase over 10 years. Nearly 20% of all police officers in those towns served on the SWAT team, a phenomenon that Kraska dubbed the militarization of Mayberry. By 1995, combining these figures for cities and towns, 77% of all American cities with over 25,000 people had a SWAT team. Kraska then asked police departments that maintained SWAT teams going back to the early 1980s to report how many times the teams had been deployed over the years, and for what reasons. Again, the numbers were jaw-dropping. In the early 1980s, the aggregate annual number of SWAT deployments was just under 3,000. By 1995, it was just under 30,000. In 15 years, the number of annual SWAT team deployments in America had jumped by 937%. Some SWAT teams, Kraska found, were conducting up to 700 raids per year. What was precipitating the surge in SWAT activity? The drug war, almost exclusively. We all know how fair that was. Logan, Utah is a typical example of the phenomenon. As of 2011, the city had just under 50,000 people. They hadn't had a murder in 5 years and had recently been rated the safest city in America. Yet, since the mid 1980s, Logan has had its own SWAT team. What does a SWAT team do in a city with no violent crime? It creates violence out of nonviolent crime. We haven't really had a whole lot of barricaded subjects. We certainly haven't had an active gunman shooter, a department spokesman told the local paper. But it was nice to have the SWAT team around just in case. In the meantime, he said, it was mostly used for assistance on high-risk search warrants. High risk meaning all or most drug warrants. We've destroyed some doors over the years that maybe wouldn't have gotten destroyed if there wasn't a SWAT team. But it's all in the name of trying to make a high-risk situation more safe for everyone. Some 43% of the police departments in Kraska's survey told him they had used active-duty military personnel to train the SWAT team when it was first started, and 46% were training on a regular basis with active-duty military experts in special operations, usually the Army Rangers or Navy SEALs. This was the goal of the joint task forces set up during the Bush administration, to encourage cooperation between local police, federal police, and the military in order to foster a battlefield approach to drug enforcement. In a follow-up interview, one department SWAT commander told Kraska, "We've had special forces who have come right out of the jungles of Central and South America. These guys get into the real shit. All branches of military service are involved in providing training to law enforcement. U.S. Marshals act as liaisons between the police and military to set up the training, our go-between. We've had teams of Navy SEALs and Army Rangers come here and teach us everything. We just have to use our judgment and exclude the information like, at this point, we bring in the mortars and blow the place up." The commander added that he had received a letter from a 4-star general expressing concern about the sort of training the department was getting. Back in the 1850s, the Cushing Doctrine had allowed federal marshals to summon U.S. troops to enforce domestic law. More than 100 years after the controversial policy was repealed by the Posse Comitatus Act, federal marshals were now soliciting elite U.S. military personnel once again, not to enforce domestic law themselves, but to teach civilian police officers how to enforce the laws as if they were in the military. Perhaps most disturbing was Kraska's finding that these paramilitary police teams and aggressive tactics were increasingly being used even for regular patrols. By 1997, 20% of the departments he surveyed used SWAT teams or similar units for patrol, mostly in poor, high-crime areas. This was an increase of 257% since 1989. SWAT proponents argue that all of this buildup was in response to a real problem. After all, violent crime had soared in the 1980s and early 1990s. But the SWAT teams weren't generally responding to violent crimes. They were usually serving drug warrants. When Kraska and his colleague Louis Kubi compared changes in violent crime rates to changes in the use of SWAT teams in the jurisdictions they surveyed, they found that only 6.63% of the rise in SWAT deployments could be explained by the rising crime rate. 6.63%. Kraska's findings prompted a surge of media interest in the phenomenon of police militarization. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the National Journal, and ABC News all covered Kraska's study. They also ran their own investigations into the issue, but nothing really changed. Politicians and policymakers didn't seem to notice, or if they did, they didn't much care. Kraska noted that fizzling out the issue in a self deprecating footnote in a book he edited a few years later. What exactly all this media attention accomplished is not quite clear. It resulted in no fame, no money, and no appreciable difference in the phenomenon itself. Of course, this wasn't Kraska's fault. Congress, state legislatures, and other politicians either weren't paying attention or just didn't find the reports particularly troubling. In fact, the phenomenon only continued to pick up momentum. The year before Kraska's reports were published, Congress had passed the National Defense Authorization Security Act of 1997, biennial bill to fund the Pentagon. One provision in the bill created what is now usually called the 1033 program, named for the section of the U.S. Code assigned to it. The provision established the Law Enforcement Support Program, an agency headed in Port Belvoir, Virginia. Its mission? To further grease the pipeline through which hardcore military gear flows to civilian police agencies. And it certainly accomplished its mission. In its first 3 years, the office handed $3.4 million orders for Pentagon gear for 11,000 police agencies in all 50 states. By 2005, the number of police agencies serviced by the office hit 17,000. The National Journal reported in 2000 that between 1997 and 1999, the office doled out $727 million worth of equipment, including 253 aircraft, notably 6 and 7 passenger airplanes, and UH-60 Black Hawk and UH-1 Huey helicopters. They issued 7,856 M16 rifles, 181 grenade launchers, 8,131 bulletproof helmets, and 1,161 pairs of night vision goggles. With all that military gear, plus the federal drug policing grants and asset forfeitures, just about anyone running a police department who wanted a SWAT team could now afford to start and fund one. And so the trend crept into smaller and smaller towns. By the mid-2000s, SWAT had come to Middlesburg, Pennsylvania, with a population of 1,363. They came to Leesburg, Florida, with 17,000 people, or Mount Orab, Ohio, with only 2,701 people, among others. In research for his ethnography on militarization, Kraska spent a good deal of time with cops and SWAT teams in these smaller cities. One general dynamic he observed was a kind of masculinity-infused arms race between police agencies that could often lead to an inferiority complex at smaller departments. These officers strongly believed that small municipalities and county police were being left behind by not having special tactical teams, Kraska writes. Smaller departments may have started acquiring SWAT teams not because of a sudden surge in violence or hostage-taking or even drug activity. The town's police departments simply saw that other police departments had them, so they wanted them too. Neil Franklin, a former narcotics cop in Maryland, also witnessed the dynamic over the course of his career. It's almost like they would get their own high off the money and the equipment, and then the agencies would get competitive. If a city department had a SWAT team, then the county wanted one. If one department upgraded to a more powerful gun or got an APV, all the departments nearby had to get the same thing. Stephen Downing, who worked in the same LAPD patrol bureau as Daryl Gates, while Gates was developing his SWAT idea, explains how the move to smaller police departments makes an already dangerous SWAT raid even more perilous. You have this "I want one too" phenomenon, Downing says. And so the SWAT team gets bigger and they start to spread and standards start to drop. You have to be very careful about who you put on the SWAT team. The guys who want it most are the last ones who should be given a spot. At LAPD, you are choosing from a force of 9,000 strong. You're getting elite, disciplined officers. And the pool is big enough so that you can screen them. For fitness, for marksmanship, all the usual stuff. But also for attitude and psychology. Side note, they screened for that? Shit. I mean, if you are familiar with LAP. Anyway. Choosiness isn't a luxury at smaller police agencies. Right now, I'm preparing to testify in a lawsuit stemming from a wrong-headed raid by a SWAT team in a 28-man police department. How do you even begin to select from 28 people? Several officers interviewed for this book made the intuitive point that the officers who want to be on the SWAT team are the last officers who should be selected for it. And how do they find time to train? At LAPD, the SWAT team will spend at least half their on-duty time in training. In my smaller town, the SWAT team is something these guys do on the side. They're patrol officers, and so what happens is they train by practicing on the people. That was page 211. Have a good night. Get books, read books.